Okay, welcome to the meeting on incentive-based QC. Uh, this is one of, I think it's the Bear Call meeting. I'm not sure. I'm going to share my screen right now, and I'll get us started. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Again, this is a joint meeting between the California Public Utilities Commission and the Energy Commission regarding the incentive-based qualifying capacity for demand response products. We're calling this putting it all together because we're going to be trying over the next two meetings to kind of go through if you will, a front and back examination of this process, both on the DRA. Is it DRA? I'm having a little bit of a moment here. DRA
Demand Side Analytics, DSA.
DSA, I'm sorry, thank you. PAM-BAM, if you will, methodology. That's what we're going to discuss primarily today. The next meeting in 2 weeks, we'll discuss the CEC. And like we say, this is kind of a starting from the ex-ante process all the way through the bidding and then the CSP process. And we have some numerical examples we're going to go through during that process. So the usual logistics, we're going to be getting this loaded up to the DR Workshops website. I know we've been having some issues. We've had some access issues, let's just say, over here. But we will get that straightened out. You're muted upon entry. Please stay muted unless you're speaking. Raise your hand if you can. Please note your surroundings, your emergency exits, and your ergonomics. We're all, not all, but a lot of us are working at home, and so we probably have that set up pretty well. And if you have an emergency, call 911 or you can try the chat, but certainly try 911 first. And since please refrain from discussing any other proceedings in this case. Commissioners are present. Actually, commissioners might not be present, but just in case they are, you might want to avoid inadvertent ex parties. So here we are in our current schedule. We're under the finalized elements. As you see, this one has a plural because we are now trying to put it all together after discussing each one on a kind of in isolation. According to this, we have 2 more meetings. We definitely do have at least 2 more meetings. We're probably going to have some follow-up ad hoc meetings along the way as we get to our December 2024 final report. So here's our agenda. I'm going through the logistics and scheduling now. Then we're going to get the PAM, if you will, numerical examples. That'll take the most of the first hour. Then a 5-minute break. We're going to do a consistency with the slice of day discussion that people have had interest in, and then CFP alternative comments and updates. So that'll be CEC. A lot of this will be shared screen today, but hopefully we will get all the presentations available for whatever presentations we do have or information we do have will be made available to everybody and also sent out after this meeting. So unless we have any questions regarding that, I'm going to move on to part 2, the BAM-PAM numerical example. And I may be wrong, but I think we're going to be trying to use the same kind of numbers for the BAM-PAM and then the CEC one in 2 weeks. And I see Daniel shaking his head yes. So that is good. So this is what we're calling putting it all together, part 1, BAM-PAM numerical example. And I believe at this point I can hand it off. Is it Josh? Are you going to be the one presenting this?
No, she did hands-on work and putting together the example. And I'm sure that I've talked too much and people want to hear from somebody new.
Okay, you dropped out a little bit. Whoever you have, if she can introduce herself and yeah, take over. And if she needs to share the screen, just let me know.
Yeah, that's Stephanie Beeler.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name's Stephanie Beeler. I'm going to be the one sharing today. I don't know. You need to give me permissions, David, but or if we should be. Let me see.
You should be able to do it.
Yep, I'm good. All right. So what I'm going to be walking through today is actually an Excel spreadsheet. So the goal for today, and I'll zoom in on this in a second, is really to kind of walk through step by step what each of these data sets are going to look like, and the process for both kind of gathering the data and developing each of these metrics. I'll stop at the end of each of kind of these big steps in case there are any questions. I won't be able to see if you're raising your hand, so Josh, if you could just let me know or moderate that, that'd be super helpful.
And as always, feel free to type in questions in the chat.
Yep, absolutely. So, okay. So yeah, again, we're planning on sharing this. This is this example is going to be using kind of data from a AC load shed program. None of this bid data is real. It's just in here for simulation and example purposes. But the goal is to kind of show what the dispatch actually does look like and what kind of these TTMs look like in practice. So I broke this out into a few different stages. I'm going to zoom in just so everybody can read the text. And then we kind of have our proposed methodology right here. To the right, if there's any kind of notes or potential modifications, we have a few here. But if anybody has any feedback or questions or things to consider, I can note these right here and we can send that out after this meeting. So I go through this starting with step one. So this first stage is really about submitting the capability profiles. So the first step in this is to develop a time temperature matrix, usually in a KW, like impacts per customer forecast. This can vary based on temperature conditions, the resource dispatch hour, and the event duration. And then an example of what this looked like is in tab 1 of this document. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit again. You can see we kind of have like our resource here. The DR provider can be here. If there are multiple resource IDs that are being dispatched, there's also an option for that. We have the event start time, the event duration, and then in this example, we have the max daily temperature. So, or if, for example, I'm trying to look at maybe a max daily temperature of, let's go to like 87 degrees, you can see within a start time of 1 p.m. and event duration of 1 hour, you can kind of expect this is hour ending 1 to 2 p.m. kind of impacts. As the event duration gets longer, you can see the impacts change over time. And then you can see as the event starts a little bit later, you kind of have slightly different impacts. And again, this is an AC load control program. This is really just based on kind of the average residential customer's cooling load and how much of that's able to be shed over a given period of time. Any questions about the, yeah.
You mind boosting it up to a higher temperature range just to kind of show people how it changes?
So this is 87. I think this goes all the way up to like, this is really weather sensitive customers. So if you boost this up to 95, you can see the impacts almost double. You go up to 9 or even 10 or 11 kW in that first hour compared to 4 for those, the lower. And again, this is max temperature. This is the max temperature for the day. So it's a daily max of 95 degrees in this case.
One additional comment just to add on here. I know there's folks who have like a nominated value. In that case, something like a temp temperature matrix would simply be saying, here's the realization rate that's expected, right? So it doesn't have to have a fancy analysis if you're looking at a resource that's pretty steady across hours or doesn't change that much in terms of delivery.
Yeah, and if you're not in a weather sensitive program, obviously you're not going to need to kind of, you can maybe have like all temperatures or something. This doesn't need to change. If you have consistent impacts across the entire event duration, you can reflect that here as well. This is just showing a program with a lot of variability, but if there's not a lot of variability, this can still be used. You probably just don't need to worry about having quite as many options. Maybe it's just event start time and duration, and you kind of have a consistent impact for all temperatures or something like that. Questions about this time temperature matrix before I move on? All right. Sounds like we're good. Okay. Step 2 is really just scaling those kW impacts up to a megawatt value. So this is done by developing an enrollment forecast for each month. So this, as an example, is we're looking at 2022 in this example. So this would be like an enrollment forecast for 2022. And this is the total number of participants you would expect to have for each month. Obviously, in this example, the program has a big ramp. I'm really just including this to show how the impacts can change from month to month. But if you're expecting flat enrollment, obviously this number would change not very much, or it would just really be reflective of what the expected enrollment is for each month. Step 3 is really just taking the data sets from tabs 1 and 2 and multiplying them together. So we go to this tab. Again, we kind of have our TTM set up over here where we have the event conditions. What we've added in is the month and the expected number of participants for every single month. And then I'm going to just zoom into a single month so it's a little bit less data to look at. A single duration. Okay. Yeah, and then so what we're doing, we have kind of our expected number of participants, we have our temperature conditions, and then we have our kW values. What we're essentially doing is taking this kW value and multiplying it by the expected number of participants. So your scaled megawatt will be based on kind of both the kW impact and the number of participants for that month. And that's essentially going to be the megawatt value that you use to kind of merge in with the rest of the data to calculate BAM and PAM. Questions on how we get to the megawatt value?
Just a quick comment. So at this point, what you kind of have is a capability profile that is effectively saying, here's what is our capability to deliver for different event conditions and temperature conditions, right? And the goal there is a handful of those conditions are going to match the actual slice of data planning conditions. But by having this set up, it allows you to directly compare later on. Here's the capability promise we set in advance that we could deliver, right, from a capacity standpoint, and allows you to compare what did you actually deliver when you had events that had the same type of conditions. So that's the whole purpose of having a time temperature matrix. Not the only purpose, but one of the primary purposes is to be able to do a comparison of here's what is the capability we promised versus did we actually deliver that when it came to the actual events.
Yep. Okay. Yeah, that's a good segue to the next thing. So yeah, this TTM megawatt forecast, obviously lot of data in here for the slice of day profiles. Obviously, we're going to filter to more specific planning conditions. So what the next step is to develop your slice of day profiles for each month. So this is an example of how that would take place. All you're doing, and I think in this, which we'll be sharing, this is really just a VLOOKUP for this TTM megawatt forecast table, is pulling in from January what your expected profile is for a 5-hour event that starts at 4 p.m. with a max daily temperature of 70 degrees. These are not the actual planning conditions. I'm just bringing them in here as an example. So again, this is AC load control program. You'd really expect showings in the warmer months. So in August, you can see pretty high megawatt capability value. You have higher enrollment in that month, higher AC load, higher temperatures. But yeah, this is really just pulling in this kind of subset of expected planning values from the profile and showing what the resource is able to do for that month.
Is this by sublap or is this for the whole portfolio?
This is for the whole portfolio.
Yeah, but this example is based on a look in a single sublap just for simplicity. Because to your point, you would have a different temperature by sublap. The whole goal is that you would have in practice a definition that says this is the temperature that meets the worst state conditions, and that really would not be something you would move from program to program, right? But the main point is that you can actually connect it back to the time temperature matrix and pull the right time temperature value from that matrix. But the same worst state condition would be different in, say, Fresno as it would be in the coastal Orange County, for example, right? It would not be the same temperature condition. It would be different.
And there's a question from Colin Smith, who's with Leap. He says, does this account for temperature change over the course of the event?
This is the max daily temperature for the event. So yeah, no, it's based on the daily temperatures.
Yeah, and Colin, just to kind of add a little bit to that, we thought about this, right? I think picking a different temperature by hour, I mean, it happens when you have like a daily temperature. I think the actual proposal that we put together was based on average temperature because it's a better metric, average daily temperature, but you do have a shape to the underlying temperature on an hour by hour basis. So that is reflected when you pull the hour as a whole, that it's tied to that. The main reason to just kind of have like a daily temperature makes it easier to make the comparison, right? All the way across. And in practice, you can pull in that information and just roll it in, and you should get like the shape because 8 p.m. is going to be cooler than 3 p.m., etc.
Yeah, so I think the underlying data that trains this, obviously the data is being pulled from that, but yeah, in practice, when you're looking at this, we're really just looking at the daily level.
Luke is asking if you can adjust the duration to see how it affects the output.
Sure.
Are you asking Luke for changing the slice of day table?
I guess I'm trying to make sure I understand all this. Thank you for doing that, Stephanie. Appreciate that.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to get a sense, like if we play around, like in a scenario where a DR provider, they're only under contract for a couple of hourly slices rather than the whole thing.
Yep.
Like how does that affect a 2-hour duration dispatch rather than a 5-hour?
Yeah, and we put this in terms of the thought process of the slice of day table. So if you had a 2-hour duration, say you want to hit 7 to 9 p.m., you could sit there and say, I want to set all of the timeframes to start at 7 to 9 p.m. and have a 2-hour duration, right? And it's kind of like we looked at this in the context of initially you're going to have the availability hour supply, but in the long run, under slice a day, you want to be able to include a 6-hour duration or an 8-hour duration if you can sustain it, right? Or shorter durations or windows that are outside or inside that availability window. So in practice, that's the beauty of a time temperature matrix, right? I can sit here and I can, as Stephanie just did, she kind of did a couple 2-hour events, but you can see like people trying to say, I want to target 7 to 9 p.m. because I have a battery that will exhaust, a resource that will exhaust after 2 hours. So you would just move it to be later on. I think this one, we're actually using a real-time temperature matrix and real exposed values here. This is a time temperature matrix that got developed in 2021 that predicted for 2022, and we pulled in real 22 values and real 2021 values. We masked the numbers, so we're faking the actual scale of it, but the actual results are real from a real program.
Okay, thank you.
And at that point, it didn't have like a start dispatch at 7 p.m., which is why Stephanie can pull that in. But in practice, you should be able to reflect that. But it also, if for BIP, for example, you can sustain a 6-hour event or a program can sustain a 6-hour window, you can put in the 6-hour window.
Yeah, so yeah, this will essentially be limited, and I kind of have the different options that were mapped in this case by kind of what you model the TTM around. So if you only want to be able to model up to 3-hour events, you would just model that and have that in your TTM data. You could have whatever start times you want, and then whatever temperature conditions you want. Or if you're not a weather sensitive program and you don't want to vary the temperature, it'll probably just be the same regardless of the temperature conditions. So there's the flexibility to kind of input whatever makes sense for your program at this point.
So in terms of, thank you for that. So in terms of the inputs for this, I'm thinking about the bigger picture now. So this matrix right here, obviously this would be unique to each utility or DR provider, each utility program, of course, and each DR provider's portfolio and all that. So there would have to be, probably, I would imagine, a considerable amount of work that would go into populating, the underlying data for all this, correct?
It's actually not that much work. It's coding work, like realistically, but I mean, literally to develop the time temperature matrix, it only requires like historical ex post data and probably about 2 to 3 hours to write the code to put it together. There's more QC that happens and people ask questions, but really putting together a time temperature matrix is not that challenging. The biggest issue is do you have enough historical data and variability in the events to be able to kind of do a proper projection out there. So if you only call events for 2 hours under extremely hot conditions, it'll be really hard for you to populate how it performs at different times. If you never had a 6-hour event, then it becomes hard to extrapolate for a 6-hour event.
Yeah. Is there I'm going to stray into the area of not knowing what I'm talking about here, but is there a window or somewhere where this model quantifies, how the quality of the output? So like using the example that you just discussed, Josh, let's say you're always dispatching at high temperatures within, from 4 to 6 p.m., let's just say, but then you want to figure out what it's going to look like if you do 2 hours before that, but I assume the EDs, someone's going to want to know, how good that output is.
Yeah, well, that's more in the development phase, right? Because I can walk you through an example of how you create that in code and kind of give people an example if they want. But the real practice that kicks in here is you're going to build a model, right, that says here's how you perform under exposed conditions as a function of temperature, start hour, different how many hours you're into the event, etc. Right, whatever else matters. And you can build whatever model you want, and you can compare actual versus predicted. So a lot of it is like how well is the underlying model, and then predicting for a wide range of conditions, and that becomes the time temperature matrix. So
yeah, and I think I don't know. So, and I think another, because it's true, some of this, for example, if this program has never experienced like 107-degree day, that would probably be considered an extrapolation. The real check of how good this model is going to be when you're looking at the PAM metric, because we're going to be able to look at the actual dispatch conditions and compare how your model did against that dispatch. So that kind of ratio is like, well, are you over predicting? Are you under predicting? How close are you to what's actually happening? So that kind of is what that ratio is demonstrating. Obviously, you're only going to be able to check that for when you were dispatched, but that is kind of the idea, is that's how we check the model.
There's a question from Nor.
Yeah.
I think I pronounced your name correctly, right?
Yeah. I guess what happens if the events are different hours?
From this?
Like I know I'm presuming that like this is a simplified thing, but like
No, that's the real one.
If the history of events were like you had an event from 4 to 6 and 5 to 7, how is the profile gonna be? Like what
Well, you're going to have a bit more risk, right? So in extrapolation, because you basically you have very little data to inform how you're going to perform underneath it. So that gives people an incentive to actually test their programs, so they can kind of lay out here's the wide range of options under which you can perform. and to also run the analysis using multiple years of data, right? Now, there's ways you can extrapolate if you want to do this. So, like, say you have an AC load control program, and I have AC end use data. I actually know the shape of the AC load, and I might be able to say I'm getting a 40% reduction of AC load during the conditions. So you could go and sit there and say, I want to apply like a 40% reduction to all the AC loads, because we're not constraining people as to how they develop the model, right? It's essentially saying, like, you can develop the model how you would like that produces the time temperature matrix. But we're holding people accountable is, well, now you're giving me a capability profile, which is really what it is. I'm going to compare the capability profile to what you actually deliver in the year after. Right.
Yeah,
So
I think
the
that's
first round, you may need to, it may encourage you to do some experimentation to be able to get as much information about performance early
yeah.
on.
I think it's the year after that I'm wondering about, like, if you have events that are, and especially in terms of going later on in the performance assessment,
Mhm.
like how would it be even the year after based on what you'd be expected to do during your full RA window? Like, if I'm just like, you wouldn't be punished for responding to your dispatches, what I'm trying to get at.
No, because in the dispatches, we're comparing what was happening during the conditions of the dispatch to what's in the time temperature matrix for the same set of conditions. So we can walk through the rest of the example, and hopefully that clarifies it a bit more.
Okay.
We have a simple question or a quick question from Haley Fitzpatrick asking if does the TTM have the ability to differentiate weekdays from weekends and weekend/holidays?
It does not in this example, but you absolutely can have it do that. If that's something we would want to consider.
Yeah, I think we started with the simplified example, to kind of say, here's a simple one. You obviously add a dimension once you add weekdays versus weekends. But I think that dimension does matter for non-residential quite a lot. It matters less for residential.
All right. Other questions, or does it make sense to walk through the next step? Okay. So the next two steps in the process, I'm not showing in this example, but for getting the QC value, this slice of day table is what would be submitted to the CPUC, and then it would be approved or modified. And then once, QC value is determined for the season, throughout the season, obviously the idea would be the DRP would submit and track bids into the CAISO market, and also would track when they're dispatched.
I do have a question for
Yeah.
step 5, which is the submitting the information to the PUC. Would folks at PUC only want to see a slice of day table, or do you want to see like step 3, which is the TTM with the megawatts and the slice of day table?
We would want to see both.
Okay, and that was Natalie speaking?
Yeah, sorry. That
Okay,
was...
okay, just recognizing voices. Okay.
Thank you.
Yep.
And this is Eric from CEC, if I can chime in on that. I also think the TTM is kind of a nice way of displaying the information, but it does come from like a capability profile, which is, probably like a series of equations, and it might be sort of easiest to, well, I think it would be helpful to submit those, sort of equations too. So that we can be sure that it's not, I don't know, if it's not constrained to sort of an equation, you could imagine ways you could really game a time temperature matrix.
Kind of curious what ways you're thinking about.
It could just be, not showing any load impacts except right, within a couple of degrees of the planning temperature.
Gotcha. But you would be able to see that in the TTM, right? Like directly.
Yeah.
The other thing, I mean, like the one of the things which I tried to exclude from the initial proposal was forcing people to follow a specific model. I think that it should be like a function or continuous, so you can kind of see like the patterns. But the reason for doing that is it basically allows people the flexibility to kind of figure out and say, what is the model that best predicts my actual performance? And it allows people to use whatever they want to use. I have a suspicion that a lot of DRPs may be using like a machine learning model in the background to do this, which you can do it that way, or you can use like a simple, different types of regression to do that. Ultimately, the TTM is built on here's all the historical impacts or a set of historical impacts, and here's how they vary. At some point, we'll probably walk you through how that's developed and give you a very detailed example of that. Maybe even show you like some of the code that goes behind that. But in practice, it's pretty straightforward to develop, and we try to give people enough flexibility to be able to do that, but and enough transparency, hopefully, to the PUC and to other folks. They say, here's what we're going to hold you accountable for. But I'm not sure, if I run like a neural network or a XGBoost model, right? Just to be very specific here, I'm not sure you're going to get like a set of equations that comes out of that directly. You'll get outputs that come out that say, here's the predictions.
Interesting. Yeah, that seems, well, I'll defer to the PUC on that, but it seems like a big set of, numbers in a TTM without some of the underlying equations. I would be very daunted by the idea of, trying to figure out whether that's reasonable.
Yeah, well, I'm also thinking about what's the most interesting thing to do, because another way to tackle that would be to say, here's the underlying data set of actual ex post that they use for the analysis. And here's the model that we ran, and here's the predicted versus actuals, right, of the model, where it kind of shows you like, here's the inputs that went into the model, here's the predictions that came out of there, and what were the actuals, right? So that's one way to kind of tackle that. But you could constrain it, a bit more. So you can say you must run a regression. I do think it's wise to kind of give people the ability to try to pick the best predictive model that they can without dictating, here's the regression you must run to produce a TTM. We can, of course, make it available so people can have a default model if they want to run it, or a default process, right? So to make it more available to folks to understand what's happening. But I also think when it comes to, because people are going to be held account to their predictions of how good they are, that are being made in advance of the resource year. So because of that, I think that giving folks as much ability to pick the best model they can is critical.
Yeah, and I agree with that. And I was probably a little overly prescriptive in the last report, and I'm open to more flexibility. But yeah, I just think seeing what those underlying functions are is really important.
Or at least including some plot that kind of summarizes the underlying patterns that you see in here, right? Because the shifting through a table is quite busy, so you can kind of at least make sure that you don't have those discontinuities that I think you're worried about.
Right, yeah.
So I added that in as a potential option. We kind of maybe discuss at a later time what specifically would make the most sense in terms of which pieces. Sorry, Natalie, did you want to add something?
No, I think I'll wait and
Okay.
see. Yeah.
Okay.
And Nor has hand up again.
Yeah, go ahead.
I forgot to lower it.
I think you forgot to lower it, Stephanie.
Okay, great. All right, so I'm going to go next into step 7. So after the season, developing the ex post impacts. So I'm going to not be super specific on estimating ex post load impacts. I know we've talked about this. The exact methodology or model that's used is really up to the DR provider, but mostly focusing on the impacts here. So I'm going to go to number 7. So I think sticking with, I guess, what currently is required in terms of the load impact protocols, we kind of have the DRP, the resource, the date that the resource was dispatched. So this will include any and all days that the resource was dispatched. So in this case, the resource was dispatched for 4 days in August and another like 8 days in September. The event start time for each event day. This resource was dispatched as 5 and 6 p.m. and then the event duration. We have the max daily temperature again, and then we have all 24 hours of the day, and I've also flagged the event hour. And then the last piece is really the percent of the resource that was dispatched. So this is just accounting for partial dispatches here. In this example, I think close to 100% of the resource was dispatched, but in some cases only parts of the resource were dispatched. And then finally here we have the ex post megawatts, so the total megawatts dispatched for the program. You can see there is snapback because this is a AC load control program, but it does have all 24 hours of impacts. And if you narrow it to the event hour, we'll see just the impacts for the event itself. So this is just, again, how you get here is flexible, but this is kind of generally the format that we were thinking of in terms of the output. And yep.
One, it might be interesting to look at, just for people's sake, the September 6th, perhaps, or 7th. I think it's September 7th in there, which is one of the CAISO, pretty extreme days. And which is a very realistic set where it got dispatched for 4 hours, and you have that window that happens where you see the pre-cooling and the snapback as well, in addition to the hour-by-hour impacts. But this is pretty standard currently, right, in terms of hourly impacts for each event. It's just that you're summarizing it and keeping only the information you need for the process in this case, and making sure that you have the ability to merge it back to the time temperature matrix where you can compare side by side. Here's what actually happened versus what you said you would be able to deliver under those conditions before that summer started.
Yeah, that's actually a good segue, Josh. So you'll see that we've really we've brought in here the event start time, event duration, max daily temperature, and month. That aligns with the start time, duration, max daily temperature, and month that we have in the TTM, where we have our expected megawatt values. So the step after this is to essentially merge in the TTM conditions or the TTM expected values based on the conditions for that event. So this is what this looks like merged. What this means is essentially we pulled in the TTM megawatts for when the resource was expected to be dispatched at 6 p.m. in August for 2 hours with a maximum daily temperature of 83 degrees. If we go to that September 7th event, we're pulling in a different value because the event happened at 5 p.m. It lasted 4 hours with a max daily temperature of 96 degrees. You can see quite a bit higher impacts for both the ex post and the TTM since we have that higher max daily temperature, but we are pulling in essentially just the values from the TTM for each of the event conditions. Questions on that process? Okay, great. So once that's pulled in for every single ex post event, we want to adjust the TTM for the percent dispatch. So this is just pulling in those megawatt values that were developed using the enrollment forecast, but in this case, only part of the resource was dispatched. So to adjust it down, you essentially multiply this unadjusted TTM megawatts by the percent of the resource that was dispatched for every single hour. So this is just this column times this column, and then you have your adjusted TTM megawatts that are going to be used for your CAM calculation. Questions? The next step.
There is a question, which is there a requirement for events to start on the hour?
So this, in this case, in this example, I think it was only full dispatch hours. I think the way we're thinking about this is there's not a requirement for the event to start on the hour. But for the purpose of this comparison, we would only compare full event hours. So if you were dispatched partway through an hour, we would not include that in the comparison. This would only be flagged as an event hour if it's a full dispatch hour. The reason for that is because depending on the program, there can be some noise. It's just hard to identify when the event kind of started and what's attributed to impact versus maybe like pre-event cooling or snapback or anything like that. Then, so after that, and I guess that's a good segue, is we would filter to full event hours. So I'm just keeping in this in here to demonstrate. So you're gonna have everything, and then you're really just filtering to the full event hour. In practice, if you really only want to include the full event hours for this comparison, I think that's perfectly fine. I think we have all 24 hours in both data sets, and it can be helpful to look at a full 24-hour load shape. But at the end of this, when we're calculating PAM, we're really just limiting to any full dispatch hour. We have our X post megawatt, and then we have our TTM megawatt that's been adjusted for the percentage of the resource that was dispatched. And then what we do to calculate PAM is we sum up X post and our TTM megawatts, and then we calculate our ratio. So again, we have our actual performance, that's our X post, then we have our forecasted ex ante, and then we have our PAM ratio, which is step 1 divided by step 2. In this case, it's 1.18. So the resource performed better than it forecasted. Questions on PAM before I move to BAM?
There's a question from David about percent of resource dispatched.
Yeah.
And how that's calculated. David, and this debates how you're going to do it, but in the load impact protocols currently, there's a requirement to report what is your enrollment and what share of those customers got dispatched for that event. So that was one way to get a percent of resource dispatched. Because that's kind of saying, did you dispatch all your resources or just part of your resources?
And I know, oh, go ahead.
So we're not asking, if it's not based on whether you were providing them at like I know we talked about a cap at like 949 or 500 or whatever. It's just that as long as you bid it in, that's considered.
Yeah. So for example, I mean, like in the bidding side, I'm kind of curious I've been curious for a while, but if there's at any point there's a partial dispatch for an individual resource ID that's tied to specific sublab. Because every time I've seen something be dispatched, the whole resource got dispatched at the sublab level. But assuming that you have a price curve for that individual resource, right, that has kinks in there, the one way to look at that, if you want to have an alternative way to compare, well, here's the full amount versus here's the share that got called, right? Because if you had a price curve for that resource that said I can give you 50 megawatts at price, 400, but I can give you 100 megawatts at price, 1,000 per MWH, then you can kind of calculate that value that way. So there's a couple of different alternatives for percent of resource dispatched that I think we can discuss, but ultimately the goal here is to adjust, right? And to say, look, if you're not providing the full resource, if you're not being, your whole resource is not being called, let's make sure that we adjust that downward.
Thank you.
I'm going to go to the bid alignment metric next. And I know I'm staying in the tabs, but this goes through essentially each step and what tab it refers to. So we'll share this after this. And if anybody wants to go through it more detail or has any questions, please feel free to reach out. But I'm going to go on to BAM next. So I'm going to start with step 1. This is going to be, and again, this is simulated, so everyone's bids might look a little bit different in practice, but wanted to provide it here as an example. So in here we have, again, resource, date, hour. I have the hourly temperature and then the max daily temperature. And then I think in this case, we just had the bidder, again, not true bid data. We had the bidder bid from 5 to 9. So the bids will show up sometime between 5 to 9, essentially whenever it gets warm enough. So if I go to like,
Why did you filter the top 2% of hours?
Yeah.
Make that easier.
So and then, yes, good call. Okay. So yeah, whenever it's warm enough, you'll see the bids kind of start to appear and they assume a 4-hour event duration. The last column here, as Josh noted, is the top 2% of the hours from 5 to 9. When the resource is bidding, it's about 80 hours in total. These are the hours that will be considered for the bid alignment metric. Doesn't mean can't bid at other times. Obviously, if you're dispatched, that dispatch will be included in the PAM metric, but these are kind of considered the high demand hours, so this is what we're including in the calculation. I think there's probably a few different options for how this flag is constructed and what it means, but for this example, we did the top 2% of the net load for the summer. And you can see a lot of this is happening in September, and also I think these align pretty closely with when the resource ended up getting dispatched these dates.
So Stephanie, a question for me, just because we didn't get a chance to discuss this earlier. You did this as top 2% of hours for the summer, because when you said 2%, I expected 160 hours or so, but you had 80, so
Yeah,
you're
for the
only
summer.
restricting it to summer. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
But the whole concept is you want to narrow down and saying, are you bidding and showing up when resources are needed? That's really the focus. So the whole summer is every single hour is not covered. Is really kind of saying, look, you pretty much have a need for curtailment when loads get really high, right? And 2% of hours typically is going to cover something like in the order of your net load will be below 75% of max when you get past 2% of hours.
Yep. So this is the bid data. The next step is similar to PAM, except we're looking at merging on the bidding conditions rather than the ex post conditions. We're essentially taking the time temperature matrix megawatts that we calculated back in step 3 and merging in based on the max daily temperature, the bid start time, and the bid duration. I think in this example, I merged it for whenever a bid was available, but in practice, I think this really only needs to be done for that top 2% where you're doing this comparison. So you can see we have the bid megawatts and the forecasted TTM megawatts, which were based on kind of the expected enrollment at that period of time and the event conditions, so that max daily temperature. Then once that's done, and I think I just did this in this example, you're filtering down to the top 2% of hours, and then similar to PAM, you are summing these two columns and you're calculating the ratio. So historic bid megawatts divided by forecasted planning megawatts. These actually line up pretty well. bid ratio is 1.01. Questions about BAM? All right. Step 10.
Sorry, quick question. This
Oh,
is
yeah,
Carlin
go
from
ahead.
Leap. Apologies if this has been answered, but just to clarify, the bid megawatts, is that how many megawatts were bid into the market, or is that related to actual dispatch?
This is
That's
how many
what is the-
megawatts were bid in the market, not related to
Okay.
dispatch. Yep.
Got it.
Yeah.
And notably, it's not asking for pricing information, which I think is the sensitive portion. It's really saying how many megawatts are you making available to the market total, right? So in practice, you know, it's really designed to say, are you making the megawatts you promised available to the markets as expected under the conditions expected? So you know, and I know there's sensitivity on the bid component, but my suspicion is that most of that is more closely linked to the actual price bidding strategy in terms of pricing.
We are also limiting to kind of the top 80 hours, which presumably are like the higher priced times. So. Okay. So to calculate the delivered capacity, I think this is the equation that we showed in the original presentation. I'm just really recreating it here. We have that slice of day table. I just pulled this in from tab 4. We have our PAM metric and our BAM metric, and we are multiplying these three together to get your delivered capacity here. So in this case, the delivered capacity is going up because both of these are greater than 1. And each and every one of these hours is scaled upward. And then I think the last part, which I don't want to spend too much time on because I know we're going to talk about it a little bit later, is kind of the capacity shortfall penalty estimation. So just kind of showing, in this case, we have, I know we have like the nameplate capacity, and I know there's some talk on how we exactly want to define this. I really just calculated this for the purpose of this example as the August peak day availability, average across all the available hours. Here's our demonstrated capacity. This is just BAM times BAM. I have a placeholder multiplier in here. You know, that's to be determined. And then the demonstrated capacity is really these two multiplied together. In this case, there's no penalty because they're exceeding their expectations. So I guess questions on that, and then I think there are a few things I just want to touch on in terms of places where it would be helpful to get feedback and iterate before we wrap up.
I have a quick question, and that may sound silly, but I want to propose like a really silly example. If you had a resource that was saying it has 100 megawatts of capacity in its TTM, and then bids in 1 megawatt and delivers 1 megawatt, do they get a PAM of 100, of like 1, and a BAM of like 0? Or is that, I mean, is that how that? Because it's
So
1 versus 100, so it'd be like 1% times 100%. So, is that,
So
am
I'm
I
just
just thinking about that right? Or
so you're saying your delivered X post would be 1 megawatt, and then your TTM is 100, and you're doing 1 divided by 100.
yeah, which would be.
Yep, that's your
1%.
PAM 0.01.
Oh, your PAM is 0.01. Okay, so, and then your bid. I'm trying.
And then if you're if
Okay,
you're
so
overbidding,
okay, I got it. Okay, yeah. So if you get, if you also only got one, okay, I got it. Okay.
But if you're bidding
Yeah.
100 and your TTM says you're going to get 100, your BAM will be 1 or be 1, right? But you'll be
Okay.
knocked for your PAM, so it would get derated when you multiply those two together. So
Okay,
you
can
can
we-
be bidding in, forecasting great things, but if you don't perform well, you'll get derated.
Okay, so okay, yeah. Yeah, thank you so much. I'm sorry, I know I needed
Yeah.
to be dumbed down quite a bit. But...
Oh yeah, no problem.
No.
No, it can be helpful to kind of plug in some examples. So yeah, absolutely.
Just a quick question, just broadly, I know people give a thumbs up or thumbs down. That's probably the best way to do it. Was this example and the layout we kind of had helpful? Because it's very detailed, but it also tries to break down all the individual steps and give you guys numerical examples. I just wanted to see if that's kind of helps answer questions overall. Again, and if it doesn't, creates confusion, give me a thumbs down too. Or give us a thumbs down. More thumbs ups than down. Okay, good. All right, so hopefully this helps.
Yeah. And then I do want to note a couple of areas where again, and we will be sharing this. Please feel free to ask us any questions as you have the time to digest it a little more, mess with the data sets, look through everything in more detail. But I think there are a few things where it would be, or I don't know if we want to open it up for discussion, but a few things that we had in mind or potential changes or modifications that we were considering. So I think someone brought this up in terms of portfolio versus sublap. But like in this example, we have a standard set of temperature conditions that applies to the entire portfolio, but it might be necessary to build that out by sublap or a different level. That might make things easier. I think we noted this. Okay, so including both full TTM and slice of date table, potential to also submit equations as well, but we can iterate on that. I think for the bids, I guess we would probably be helpful to kind of get feedback from people on how they currently bid and what limitations they're running into. Because I think in this example for the bids, we're kind of assuming DRPs are able to bid in their capability for the exact dispatch window, and it would be helpful to get feedback on terms of whether or not that's realistic, what the limitations are, if there's anything we should account for, especially with the bid alignment metric with regards to bidding. For PAM,
You might pausing on,
oh, yeah.
on the bids because I think it's worth
Sure.
a bit more discussion there. Bids are something like for at least the DSA side, we don't have as much experience submitting the bids. I know you guys do, but one of the key elements here is like, can you realistically reflect what the capability in the bidding process, or is there a constraint? Because there's two ways to arrive at this, right? Because the purpose of bidding is twofold. One of them is to give visibility to CAISO, so they can put it in the supply stack. And the other one is to ensure, that you're delivering the resources that you said you had available around that time or have that available. But I know that there can be challenges, possibly around things like, well, if it's the second hour of an event, it's going to be a different value than the first hour. And specifically, just understanding that, because there's two ways to kind of handle it, right? If there's currently a technical constraint that would require a software change, the other way to kind of handle that would be to have a very clear definition as to what should be bid. If the constraints can be, if all of the actual capability cannot be fully reflected in the bidding process. But that's really an open question, that we probably want to cover in a bit more detail, because it's both critical, not just to our proposal, but also to the BNLI proposal. Both of them kind of try to incorporate bids into the process. So if the bids can properly reflect the capability, then that's something that we need to address for both the proposals.
Yeah. So probably don't have to solve it right now, but yeah, definitely something that I think is important, especially for the bid alignment metric. We want to make sure we're accounting for any, obstacles that anyone's currently facing, or technical limitations or things like that. Another thing we're considering, and I guess this gets, oh yeah, of course.
Sorry, can I jump in here?
Sure.
So I think another sort of area that, and maybe this is just to repeat Josh's point, but I think another area this comes up is sort of slight alternative design to the performance alignment metric that I've been sort of interested in pursuing is just comparing the actual load impact to what was dispatched, right? So if there is a partial dispatch in whatever form, Josh brought up the question, does that actually happen, or are these resources all going at the same time? But so I think how bids are submitted and sort of like how flexible they are, like really matters a lot to, which of these proposals make sense. So that's why we're trying to get feedback from, those with sort of schedule coordinator type roles and experience.
Yeah, I guess tied to exactly what Eric just said, with the performance limit metric specifically, we're currently comparing this to the TTM megawatts multiplied by the percent of the resource that's dispatched. I think Eric's proposed kind of just using the dispatch megawatt as a point of comparison. We would definitely be interested in hearing if there is a preference one way or another. And yeah, again, hearing about how often the partial dispatch happens, if people with heterogeneous kind of customer populations are affected by some sort of percent dispatch haircut, things like that. It'd be really helpful to get feedback. And I think that's also something we'll be looking at when we're testing these methods.
Yeah,
And
thanks,
then
Stephanie. Sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead.
I just wanted to piggyback off that one, since I know Leap is on the line. I'm really thinking of folks like you who do have, customers of really different sizes that might be in the same aggregation or resource ID. And so I'm curious to get your take on, if the adjustment for partial derates is or not derates, partial dispatches is percentage of customers dispatched, is that going to present problems?
And then the final one is just again, we're just flagging top 2% of summer hours. If there's other metrics or other ways to kind of narrow that window down for what bids are kind of the ones that should be included in the BAM metric, we're very open to feedback on that as well.
One thing which I'll point out is that anybody who wants to allow data to be used for this, we're happy to kind of run the example with the data you can provide. Realistically, we need like historical ex post data, and it can be constrained so it doesn't have like actual customer numbers for customers that are too small, right, in general. And we can develop the time temperature matrix, and we can say, here's what happened for year 2. So ideally, if you get like 3 years of historical ex post data, you can develop a time temperature matrix off the first 2 years and predict for the third year, and kind of walk through an example that we can kind of understand how it performs for different programs. I think the bid alignment metric's a bit more challenging because obviously once you change the rules, the bidding behavior changes. So I don't know if the historical bidding behavior is relevant in this particular case. But I wanted to invite folks that if they want to test this using their data, we're open to that, and we can talk about how to facilitate that.
So, Stephanie, are you done?
I'm done. Yeah. I can hand it back to you. Again, yeah. Thanks for everybody for taking the time to listen. And yeah, we'll be sharing this worksheet. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me and Josh, and we're happy to have any discussions or follow-ups.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Ed. Was actually that was very very good. Very well. Let's take a 5-minute break. We'll be back at it's about 4:15. and we have a couple other topics to discuss. And then remember, next meeting in 2 weeks, we're going to discuss the CEC proposal using the same data. So we'll something to compare to. So 4:15, if everybody could come back, that'd be great. All right, welcome back, everybody. Let's go right back into it. We're going to now talk about consistency with slice a day. I believe this is Daniel. Is that correct? You're going to be the one
Yeah,
speaking on this?
I mostly wanted to. We had a slide from last time we all met that we didn't really get enough time to talk about as a group, and so I wanted to go over. And this doesn't have. We talked a little bit about this just now at the end of Stephanie's demo. I think it probably has less relevance to the BAM-PAM methodology, but the question about how do we go and start to think about these shortfall penalties if we're taking them as sort of hour increments. This may be more relevant to discuss in the CEC's BNLI discussion, but I wanted to put it back up because I know we went through it pretty quickly last week. And I noticed that there are maybe some relevant questions in the chat to this point as well. But just as a quick review of this, trying to think about what hours need to be shown in slice of day. I know there were some comments on this, so I don't want to dwell on it too long if it's not relevant to today's I guess discussion. But if there was some lingering questions, I think now would be a good time to open it up. And if not, we can maybe go over this more on the CC demo. Oh, I'm now seeing a hand from Luke.
Yeah, hi. Folks on the phone don't know me. Luke Tugas, consultant for the California Efficiency and Demand Management Council. Thanks, Daniel, and thanks to Josh and Stephanie for the prior presentation. So, is staff proposing to average across the shown capacity hours in order to get like a single QC value? Is that the idea?
That is sort of the proposal here, yeah.
Okay. I would suggest that we not do that because, I mean, in a way, it kind of defeats the purpose of having the slice of day in the first place, which is to have, hourly specific RA requirements as well as, hourly specific QC values, I would think. And even from, and I imagine, be a lot of folks who would agree with this, that, when we have longer events and all that, then, the QC value, is going to change, the more hours out you go. So it was, I think what I struggle with is a little bit, and I think, Josh's and Stephanie's model, did a good job of showing it, is that, the values change, for what the QC values change for a given DR resource, let's say, based on when they're dispatched, what hour they're dispatching, for how long they're dispatched. And so it seems like there's a lot of different kind of scenarios that you could, dispatch scenarios that you could use, or showing scenarios for that matter. I guess that's ultimately what I'm getting at, in order that are going to have an impact on the hourly QC value. And so I guess I'm rambling here, but I think it's sticking to individual hour specific QC values, I think, makes the most sense.
So we also have a hand from Amy from SCE.
Yeah, hi, this is Amy Wong from SCE. I agree with Luke. Under the slice of day, we're putting in values. So to be honest, and I guess really my question is, it wasn't clear to me when you say shown, are we saying like these are values that go into that, you know, the energy division, slice of day, like compliance templates, or is this something that, you know, we're expected to reflect in our CAISO bids? I apologize if you had mentioned this earlier, but it wasn't really clear to me where exactly these numbers or these values are supposed to be included in.
Right. I believe Sean, I think, is ex post capacity hour. So I think demonstrated um, would be another word we could use there.
Okay, so this is like a new, this is like something new that we don't already provide. Like this is a new template or a new spreadsheet or whatever this is.
Right. The order of operations here is specific to the BNLI method.
Okay.
Chime in on this. So I think the shown capacity hours reflects what would be in the ex ante, right? Like submission to CPUC and CAISO, right? That if you're
I'm sorry,
using
I'm
it,
mistaken then. Apologies.
if you're using it, no, it's okay. If you're using it to, you know, to say I have this capacity that differs across these 4 hours, that we'll have to look at those 4 hours to see sort of how you did over the course of the month. Yeah, and that's how, you know, that was the previous proposal. I am sensitive to Luke's perspective on this and have been sort of thinking more about, you know, what, especially from a contracting perspective, what these sort of resources look like. And I am thinking more and more about sort of treating each resource that, you know, might be multiple hours of different capacity values kind of as a bundle. And so, you know, you wouldn't really have to look at how, you know, you wouldn't have to do this kind of last step process of, you know, averaging those 4 hours or whatever. You would just sort of say, let's look at the whole thing. How did it do overall? And I do think the DSA proposal does a good job of that, depending on how it's implemented. But yeah.
Eric, what did you mean
Now
by
I'm rambling.
how it does overall? Like, are you talking about, like, just to use a simple example, like a 2-hour dispatch that, as long as the megawatt hours between the 2 hours add up to the right number, that's sufficient?
Yeah, it could be that. Although I think that is effectively the same as just doing a straight average across the capacity hours. It could also be looking at, Stephanie, I think, showed the top 2% of hours, you know, of that hour ending, right? So we could do something like that where let's just look at it in its highest values, or greatest grid need kind of times. I'm always partial to weighting, so we could look at a weighting scheme where, you know, more critical hours just have a higher weight than other ones, and we include all that data. So I think there's a few ways to do that.
Well, one thing I do want to say is that, or two things. One is that I think Amy made a really good point that if we start averaging or skewing the values, the QC values from 1 hour to the next, then we're setting up, you know, the utilities and DR providers to get penalized if they're not bidding their QC values. And so there's always that risk, of that outcome if we average across, you know, any number of hours. In the weighting thing, I know you like that, Eric, you know, as, you know, kind of quant dude, quant person and all that. But I guess I'd have to see more about it in terms of how that would work. I mean, if we're going to wait, I mean, I assume, would you be thinking about like waiting, like for instance, the availability assessment hours as opposed to other hours, or certain hours within the AH, or?
I would say it's whichever hours the resource is shown for capacity, right? Which could be the availability assessment hours or not. And then there's sort of the whether we need to account for take back there, still an open question.
Right. I guess I'd have to see more specifics in terms of the weighting and all that. I mean, I guess I would ask is, what is staff trying to solve for doing, averaging across multiple hours?
So, yeah, great question. If we're doing a penalty, we can't really say, oh, you overperformed here, you underperformed here. We have to figure out how to wrap that all up into one sort of, here's what you committed to, here's what you did, right? And that's how we assess a penalty. And so we need to figure out a way to do that. So an average is just equal weighting, right? But we can do other weights. Yeah, so we have to get to that last step to assess the penalty.
Sure. Why not just do it by slice? And I'm probably thinking about this too simplistically, so feel free to jump in. But let's just say you have a DR provider who's showing for 3 consecutive hours, within the AH, just to keep it simple. So their performance in each hour is going to be, let's say, the same amount of capacity. But I mean, wouldn't it make sense to just assess performance during each hourly slice separately, or I'll say individually, and then they can be aggregated? And so this is one of the reasons why why the council's been supporting an overperformance, a modest overperformance buffer, because if you're overperforming a little bit, or even if it's a lot, but you don't get credit for a little bit of overperformance for one resource, then it would be it could offset underperformance by another resource, within that same contract, let's say, or within a given utility program. To me, that makes the most sense, and then so allows for a certain degree of kind of aggregation, or smoothing out risk a little bit without making it so much that it one really good performing resource could just make up for a bunch of bad ones.
Right. So I mean, I think there's 2 different issues kind of mingled here, and one is differences between hours and one is differences between resources.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure.
In terms of differences between hours, I think what you're saying makes perfect sense to me, as long as there are sort of like line items for each hour, right? Like an LSE is saying, I'm buying 10 megawatts of capacity for hour ending 17 and 11 megawatts for hour ending 18, and they all have different prices associated with them.
Mm-hmm.
Like that works, I think. But if we do that and there aren't sort of specific prices attached to those, then you still have to say, like, okay, well, you underperformed in the first hour, overperformed in the second, and underperformed in the third. Then if we're just going to right, if we don't know sort of how to weight those by the different prices of the hours in the contract, then we probably just have to do something that's effectively equivalent to what we're suggesting here, which is weight them equally and say, okay, your one that you overperformed cancels out with your one that you underperformed, but that second underperformance, that means overall you underperformed. So
right.
Yeah, so I just think we have to find some way to get to one kind of performance value. Like that's really all it is.
Yeah. I'm just
It
thinking
doesn't
of.
have to be this way.
No, it's okay. Sorry to interrupt. I'm just
Go
putting
ahead.
Amy. I'll stop talking in 1 second. I'm just putting my ISO hat on, and I'm just thinking that they're going to want to avoid any sort of motivation to to do any sort of large overperformance in a given hour or anything like that. And I understand, the 5% overperformance buffer we propose, is an overperformance, but at the same time, it's intended not to be so large, that it's going to kind of throw everything off kilter. And I'm done.
Right.
Thanks, Amy.
And your performance buffer, as I understand it, that would only be applied to a specific hour, and then you could, or a specific resource, but then you could average it out. Yeah, is that correct?
Yeah, the idea, let's just use a simple example, 1 hour for 2 different resources. One resource overperforms at, let's say 110%, but it only gets credit up to 105%, and the other one performs at 85. And so, in this case, weighting the average, in this case, we'll assume that each resource is the exact same size. But if they were not the same size, then there would have to be a weight probably of some sort, I would imagine. So that, a 1 megawatt resource couldn't, overcompensate for underperformance of a 10 megawatt resource or something like that.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And so, let's see. I think I just want to be clear that, like, I think when we're talking about not having an overperformance band, we're really just talking about that end stage where it's like contract level, portfolio level, across all different hours of the day and resources, that we can't use the penalty mechanism to give you a bonus. I think, to your point, we might not want to allow total averaging across different resources and hours and everything. But I think as a default, we are definitely open to that kind of overperformance.
Yeah, so this is Amy from SE. Actually, I do. So I agree with you, Luke. I feel like what's being described is very similar to like the capacity bidding program. So I think the complexity here, right, is when we talk about resources, or I guess I should clarify, when I hear the word resource, I actually think the word program in my head. And our demand response program, like the capacity bidding program, the way we bid it into the market is by subload aggregation point, right? SLAP. So depending on, where those customers are located, we register them under their appropriate resource ID. Now, when we do QC values, we don't get QC values at the sublap level, right? We get a QC value for the whole entire program. So, and the way that, so if to use your example, if this resource is worth 10 megawatts, right, that 10 megawatts, depending on where the customers are located, are going to be spread across 6 subload aggregation points, and then depending on how many resource IDs. So when we're getting assessed whether we've met our QC value or not, it's really hard to do it on a either locational basis or CAISO resource ID basis, because, in aggregate, supposedly, in theory, all of the different resources add up to those 10 megawatts, and that's what we're really being judged against. So I do think that there is going to have to be some sort of averaging, or looking at the resource or program in its totality from a QC perspective. And if you try to disaggregate it, you know, or look at it more granularly, it's going to be really difficult because that's not how QC values are assigned. So
Hey,
just,
David, I just wanted
yeah.
to let you know we can't see your slides anymore.
No.
I can't.
Thank you.
There we
Okay.
go. Thanks.
Easy to forget.
Um,
Thanks,
so
Amy.
I think that's just another part of the complexity of all of this is, yeah, how do we do it between, not only just between hours, but also between, you know, market resources or resource IDs.
Yeah, I mean, I am absolutely open to doing this. You know, just to be clear, when I talk about resource, I mean KISO, I mean resource ID. But if you know utilities want to do this at the you know hourly level, at the program or contract level, you know, then that's fine. You know, that works better for you know for the DR, you know, for DR providers because and I assume it works better for utilities as well because, like you said, you know, it allows us to kind of pool the performance risk, you know, across multiple resources within a given program or contract. So that yeah, that totally works.
Yeah, I think on board with everything that was said there. Had a thought but lost it. We can keep going.
Great. Well, I think we'll have a more opportunity to dig into this a little bit on the next time we meet, and how the ultimate value, like capacity values, are assessed.
Daniel, I had a quick question and
Sure.
comment
Oh
at the
yeah.
same time.
By all means.
Just raise my hand. The comment that is just in general. I think that the only reason things are broken down to sublap ID is to bid it into the energy market, because in practice it's a capacity product, which tends to be either local capacity or a product, or more typically a basically IOU or LAP type of product, right? That people are providing. So to me, like the sublap ID, there's this interesting part where you have to reconcile what's happening in the energy market, which breaks it down to the sublap with the real value here, which is at the capacity level. So there's going to have to be aggregation at a portfolio at some point. The two questions which I have here are related to under the BNLI proposal. What happens if a given hour is not dispatched for a given month at all? Because it's going to happen, right? You're going to have like hours where you're showing as having available capacity, but you may not be dispatched at all during that season for that hour or at all for that month, right? So I'm just kind of curious how you guys tackle that overall. And the second question I have in here is there really a need to have a different value by month?
Let me tackle the first one. I think, you know, just in order to develop the regression, right? Like you have to have a data point, right? So I think how we've handled this and what we've done in DSGS, for example, is, you know, if you don't get a dispatch in that hour that you're seeking capacity for, you get a 0 for that hour, right? So I mean, it's effectively a one test per per season requirement, right? You just have to get a data point.
Is it per month and by hour, or is it per season?
It is per season. Well, this is not applicable in DSGS, but I would I think what the recommendation is 1 per season per hour.
So, I mean, if you want to draw a line, you need at least 2 points, right? So just basic. So if you had 1 point, I mean, there's going to be cases, right? Because it's really KISO who's going to run the dispatch. And say, take a look at this 2023. It was not a very extreme year. You probably did not have the need to dispatch resources for many of those hours. You're going to have lots of programs that are not going to have dispatch to cover the full range of hours. Whereas you can contrast that to 2022, when you had really extremely hot conditions and you had lots of dispatches, right? So I think you really have to consider, you know, if you're going to run a different regression by hour, am I going to really have enough data points? You know,
Yeah.
and so would you be using, like, let's pretend I have 2 data points for hour 9 overall, would you use that regression from those 2 hours, even though they're not for individual months, to develop a capacity for each individual month?
So wait, so the question is, wait, can you say that again? We
So
have
I say
two
I have,
data
so
points.
say I have two data points for hour ending 9 p.m.,
Okay.
right? And they both happen to occur in the month of September. Will
Hmm.
you take those two data points and extrapolate to the other months?
I'd say if they're in the same season, yes.
Are we discussing the CEC proposal now?
Yeah,
Yeah,
we
sorry.
are. And I think maybe I want to acknowledge that we're going to go over this in more detail the next time we
Okay.
meet. I appreciate all the thoughts on all of this. It'll probably be a lot more straightforward, all of these points, having sort of a similar step-by-step example
Okay.
that we had today.
And I just want to say also, I think this is going to be an issue in the BAM PAM proposal as well. In the example program that we're working with, I think it's only a, what is it, June through October program. So, I think for purposes of analysis, we'd sort of consider that the season here, right? We wouldn't want to look at all the other months and say, oh, it's not bidding, it's not, performing.
Yeah.
And
I
I believe we only have data from August and September, right? So
yeah, but it's
issue.
It's a non-issue with BAM and PAN because we're not trying to develop different different performance numbers by hour or by month, right? So because we're not trying to do that with the BAM and PAM, it's a non-issue. The big issue is, can you get really predictive values, in your capability profile?
I mean, I guess so, but I think the similarity is that we're not collecting data on, say the month of June, right? Or at least not performance data in either case.
Yeah.
And we're saying, we're still saying, yes, you met your obligations in June based off of your performance, your bidding obligations in June, but then your performance based on August and September.
Okay. And can I just ask, why do we need a different value for each month?
I think for purposes of reliability, we want to know what a resource can reasonably be expected to deliver, especially, and I mean, this is really only relevant to the weather sensitive resources. But if we're not expecting it to be quite as hot in June as it is in, September, then we might not expect the resource to perform as much.
Now, ideally, that's reflected in the capability profile that gets provided to you, right? But you're basically trying to sit there and say, hey, does the pattern that we saw in the capability profile match the pattern that we see based on the events called for this given year? So in years where you have a lot of hot temperatures, you have lots of data. In years where you have very cool temperatures, you have very little data to run those capacity demonstration regressions.
Yes.
Okay. All right, we'll give you a chance to actually put together a detailed example before we pepper you with more questions.
Appreciate it.
We're working on it. Thanks.
So with the limited time that we've got left, I think we also wanted to give a chance to acknowledge that we did receive comments on the previous meeting topic. We have some demonstration of, I think, in practice, some of these points. I don't know if we want to. I know Eric has a lot of this in a format that we're hoping to do live, but given the time constraint, I'm wondering if that's the best use of our time right now. But any event, the points that we received comments on were on the alternative CSPs that we proposed. I think in practice, it's a little bit easier to see how changing that buffer zone or changing the slopes of each of these penalty formulas will affect the bidding strategies of resource. Eric, I'm going to kind of defer to you whether you want to take on a super brief version of the sort of Tableau demonstration, or whether that maybe we could share something in slides for later.
Yeah, let's try it real quick.
Okay.
If folks are lost, we'll try to come back to this with better.
Yeah, I think
better
it
images.
grounds this in a way that just sort of talking about moving lines around I think will be productive, hopefully. Anyway.
Okay, so let me take a stab at this. So just to introduce you to what we're looking at here, I just tried to simulate what would happen if you had a resource with an average 100 megawatt capability, right? Just for simplicity. And so, but then I modeled some kind of randomness, right? We know it's on average 100 megawatts, but we don't know specifically what it's going to do next year. And so I basically modeled, what if I bid or offered into the market 100 megawatts or 90 megawatts or 105 megawatts, and then simulated many times if the resource either sort of overperforms or underperforms relative to that 100 megawatt resource, and then applied the penalty mechanism to it. So I want to start with this gray line here, which is the original proposal, which shows that, if you don't, if you offer a very small amount of capacity into the market, you're only going to get paid for that, right? Because there's no overperformance incentive. So basically it increases as you offer more and more and more. You get to 100, that's where it sort of tops out, because if you offer any more than that, then you're going to get hit with the penalty. And that is the basic idea behind the capacity shortfall penalty in its sort of original form. Now, the one I'm showing here has very little variability from one year to the next. I modeled it with a standard deviation of 1. So all the values are going to be within, 1% or 2. And so I want to sort of look at the other two that were proposed. And so
Can you,
last year,
the 1% is better
Yeah.
than realistic. You might change that to 10%. Just going back.
let me get there.
Okay.
So the other one that was proposed in the last meeting was, okay, let's give it a 5% buffer where we just give you full compensation for all 100%, and then we sort of apply an increased sort of slope, right? An increased penalty relative to that. And so under that proposal, again, with very little variability, if you know precisely what your resource is going to do next year, it's a really good idea to over offer, right? So the optimal here is to commit 105 megawatts, and you'll get paid for nearly all of that, about 104, right? Because you'll underperform by about 5%, but that's okay. You'll mostly be in that sort of buffer area. And this is exactly what Gil had pointed out last meeting. And let's see, I see a hand from Lizette. Otherwise, I'm going to add some randomness to this.
Okay, just
Lizette?
very quick. Good afternoon. This is Lizette Garcia from SDN. Does this proposal change from, because I remember that in the previous version of the CSP was that if you commit 100%, the highest value that you can get is just only 100%. This is like a kind of different scenario.
So that's a That's a good question. It's 100% of your committed capacity, right? And so if you commit 105 megawatts, you can get paid for up to 105 megawatts. So it's not that this resource is committing 105, showing 105 on a, excuse me. It's not that it's showing 100 in a supply plan and then getting compensated for the overperformance. It's that it's over committing by 5 megawatts and then not getting penalized. Does that make sense? Because
Okay, I
that
see.
5% is still within the buffer.
Gotcha. Okay, got it. Thank you for the clarification.
One clarifying question. In this example they have here, what is the lambda? Because I see that basically the commitment and the performance appear to be following each other linearly, which would imply a lambda 0.
So it's the original is a lambda of 1, right? So just 1 plus the 1 for the
Yeah, but
lambda.
if with lambda of 1, if I recall correctly, you would be the effective capacity would be 80% if you delivered had 80% performance. I'm just trying to understand. Maybe I'm not understanding fully.
So this is saying if you let's do if you committed 110 megawatts, you would typically underperform by 10 megawatts because it's a 100 megawatt resource, and so you'd get 90.
So this is not factoring the penalty multipliers, just so I kind of show here's the megawatts and here's the expected effective capacity, but at some point there's a penalty that kind of it goes in the opposite direction. So if I go in the opposite direction of your hump, right, where I kind of underperform, and under the initial proposal, right, if you underperform by say 10%, you will get 80% of payments.
So this does reflect the penalty, right? The original penalty, which is saying that if you are offering 110 megawatts and you only deliver 100, then you'll get paid for 90, right? Because you lose that 10 and then you lose that 10 again as a penalty.
Okay, can you flip the other direction? So if you offer in the other direction, what you're basically saying, if I offer
90 and I deliver 100, I still only get paid for 90.
Gotcha. So like the
there's no
difference here is
overperformance.
you're not showing in terms of like the payment, you're showing in terms of effective megawatt. Got it. Okay.
Right. But the effect is basically the same. So I think generally what we want is something that gives us an optimal value kind of near these crosshairs, right? We want DR providers to offer in something that's accurate, right? Very close to 100 on this axis. But then we want them to be able to get paid about 100, which is this axis. So next step is to add in some variation. And so under the original capacity shortfall penalty, you see they're still offering 100, which is good from a policy perspective, right? That's accurate, but they're only getting paid for 96% of that, 96 megawatts, right? So Josh, this is exactly the point you brought up a couple of weeks ago, which is that you're only ever going to get underperformance, right? And that is the trade-off I think that we're trying to balance here, which is this kind of tendency to, if we have a buffer, to overcommit versus, this tendency to underpay if, if we can all acknowledge there's some randomness in, DR.
In the measurement, yeah.
And so then the green one that's like kind of the in-between case is where we start with the 5% buffer, but then we have that kind of quicker increased penalty that gets back down to the original CSP line pretty quickly. And so that is kind of where I'm leaning these days, right? Because it's maybe a small amount of overcommitment here. It's 2%, or maybe 1% when you increase that to 10. But you're still getting higher revenues than under the original one, right? It is giving some, and especially when you have sort of lower standard deviation or higher confidence in what you'll be able to hit, you can get pretty darn close to that 100% or 100 megawatts. Kind of takes the best of both worlds here a little bit.
So Eric, just for clarification, the green one that you have there, right, is effectively saying like here we're going to have a buffer zone where there's essentially you get 100% of the payment if you're above 95% of the commitment value, and then you have the steeper penalty. Okay.
And then you have the steeper penalty until it hits the original line, which is why under this scenario you see it looking a lot like the buffer scenario until you get here. And then it meets with the sort of original one up in this region.
So a lot of this is going to be dependent on what the confidence is, or confidence interval is on measurement, and how much randomness there actually is in measurement.
Yeah, you really need to have like the right relative precision, right? So I mean, like the common metric that people report is relative RMSE, but that's not relative precision, because you need to and a common number around there is probably like, if you get below 10%, you're doing great. If you get below 5%, it's really rare. You need to have RCT to get that. But in practice, and that's very similar to the standard deviation, but in practice, you need to say what fraction is that as a share of the percent reduction, because that's your true relative measure. Right, so I think like that 10% value is probably like more reflective of what you'll see, but it's going to vary from program, right? Because if I look at a program that has a small percentage reduction, they're going to have a hard time achieving really high relative precision. If I look at a program that has a really big percent drop, like say it's a ag pumping program, they have like an 80% drop in load, there you're going to have a much easier time achieving relative precision.
Yeah, I think that's true.
All right. Well, we're coming up on time here. We got 2 minutes. I'm just gonna go over next steps real quick here. So we have decided we're not going to quite take comments yet on the DSA proposal. We're going to do the CEC proposal next in 2 weeks with the numerical example, and so we'll do that. The CEC presentation on the BNLI method. This is again, we're going to go through all the steps. We're also going to start talking about a study plan that we're going to come up with for the research portion. Broader discussion of data needs, maybe the DRPs can start thinking about, or possibly the data. If they have an understanding, but we're going to talk about that next time. The working group going forward. This was very much the setup here. We're going to have other things to do in this working group, and the expectation is to have a written study plan before Christmas for everybody to kind of see and maybe comment on. And then we'll also have another opportunity for people to comment. We're going to be available for one-on-one meetings. We're going to probably, like I said, schedule some ad hoc meetings along the way. But again, that'll be about the working group going forward. And so that's just what we're expecting now. We're available. You have our email addresses too. And I don't want to speak for Josh, but he seems pretty open to people reaching out to him and asking questions about the PAM methodology.
That is correct.
Yeah. Okay.
I think
I'm also open to testing your data if you want to share. I'm also open to testing your data if you want to share. So like if you actually want to see how your program performs, we can help out with kind of testing that out.
Yeah.
And we can talk about the parameters.
The offer that you made in the chat of the sort of technical session to produce the TTM, I think will would fit well with this sort of broader discussion of data needs as well. So
Mhm.
hopefully we'll be in touch. But
Yeah, and we know the holiday season's coming up, so we'll finish with this meeting, and I can see ourselves kind of taking a break, if you will. I don't want to say for sure, but we're gonna start doing some more work behind the scenes to get the study plan together as well.
David, this is Luke. Is the next meeting on the 16th or the 17th?
It would be the 16th. Yeah, sorry.
Okay. But it's okay. I just want to make sure I wasn't confused.
Yeah, no, you're right. Yeah, no, you got it. So yeah, right now it's on the 16th, barring any complications. So, all right. Well, again, thank you everybody for joining us. We appreciate the comments and everybody's participation, and we'll see you in a couple weeks and maybe hear from you before then. Thanks everybody. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Right.